Hey everybody, this is Josh from Solopreneur Grind for episode 106 of the Solopreneur Grind podcast. I'm lucky to be joined here by Quinn, who's the founder of Top Mark. Quinn, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to be here, and I appreciate you having me.
Awesome, Quinn. Can you tell us a little bit more about Top Mark and what it is and what you're focused on these days?
Yeah, so it's essentially a platform that helps you sell your car for the most money. A lot of people these days have probably seen commercials from Carvana and Vroom asking to buy your car, and not everybody knows that there's actually probably 10 other sites that are also doing that, and there's a new one every day. And so we aggregate those in a kayak-like fashion, so you can go to one place, put your information in, and get offers from a bunch of different dealers at once. So you kind of know what's out there, and who's going to give you the most money. So yeah, at a high level, that's pretty much what we do, and yeah, we've been having fun with that.
Very cool. So just to go a step further, so you can make kind of like one posting, almost like I guess it's kind of like a Facebook marketplace in the sense that you're making a post for a car you're looking to sell, and it will auto push or auto advertise to all the different websites online as opposed to making 10 different posts.
Yeah, exactly. And the cool thing these days is like a lot of these sites do automated offers. So if you have a car, you put your information, and we can get you offers, hard cash offers from different websites in 5 minutes. But we take that one step further and sort of do what you're talking about, where we also quote unquote post it to local dealers, and then local dealers can also go and see, if the local BMW dealer really wants your BMW, they can add a manual offer, and those tend to be higher. So you really
Wow.
get kind of the full lay of the land in terms of what your car is worth and what opportunities you have to sell it.
Very cool. I gotta ask before we go deeper, where are you right now? It looks like you're in like a super cool lodge in the middle of a nice like snowy atmosphere.
Yeah, it's very snowy. We're in the midst of the second like 2 feet of snow storm this week, but I'm in Warm River, Idaho,
Okay,
in a
interesting.
small lodge on the river.
Very cool. It looks like a great
Yeah.
spot. So Quinn, can we go back in time? Where did your entrepreneurial journey begin? Is Top Mark the first business you started? And if not, what was it and how did that come to be? And if it was, what were you doing before?
Yeah. Okay. So let me just sort of try to unpack that step by step. In terms of the companies before, this is the first C corp, sort of my first official run at running a company. But I've had sort of side businesses, ways to make money. I've helped people sell their cars kind of on a side gig, growing up in high school and in college, but didn't really officially call it that. I really took kind of the typical tech route. I got a background in electrical engineering. I did undergrad, master's, and then went to stereotypical tech company. But I always wanted to do the startup thing. From a young age, it was always kind of in my blood. I liked kind of trying new things, testing things out. And so I went into the corporate world knowing that I was going to leave the corporate world. It was just when.
Right.
And so I did that for about 4 years, and I was in the engineering organization, and then I went into the project management org, and then I even went into the enterprise sales org, which, a lot of entrepreneurs that have a tech background tend to avoid that because it can be not that fun, but it gives you a lot of perspective in terms of, how do you really sell a product and sort of get out in the trenches and meet customers. And so that was a really important to me. And once I did that, that's kind of when I jumped ship and said, all right, I'm ready to go.
Right. It also sounds like great training, right? Having the experience in tech, product management, and sales. I mean, it sounds like a crash course in how to start and run your own business, which is awesome. You mentioned helping other people buy cars in high school. How did that come to be? Because there's an obvious link, right, to what you're doing now and the fact that you were doing that so long ago.
Yeah, so I grew up, my family is pretty into cars, just, from the get-go. And so we went to a lot of car auctions. I sort of saw pricing starting at a young age. And then, I feel back in the day before there were a lot of good pricing platforms, when you had to sell your car, what you did was kind of ask around like family and friends, like, okay, who knows how to sell a car? And I was kind of that guy that people would come to. And then I ended up just kind of facilitating, deals for them in certain places when they didn't know whether they were getting a good deal or which cars they should buy. And so it just kind of came about somewhat naturally, I'd say.
Very cool. So then, okay, so you went to school, you end up working at a tech company, and you were there for 4 years. At what point, like, what was the trigger to leaving that company? Was there an event? Was this something you were, X amount in savings, or what was it that led up to quitting that job?
Yeah, so I think it's great you bring up savings because I think a lot of people sort of leave that out on the startup, founder journey. Everybody's like, yeah, just drop out of school and go do it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really hard, if you don't have savings. And so I tend to suggest, going in the corporate world if you can a little bit to get some money. So that was a big focus, but there wasn't like a certain dollar amount I was waiting for. I had sort of hit a point where I was comfortable and I thought I would be able to sustain myself until I could raise money. I think really what it was it's if you move across an organization, especially like an enterprise size organization, going from the engineering org to the PM org is hard, but you can do it. Going from the PM org to the sales org is kind of weird, but you can do it. Going from the sales org back is much harder. It's just like it's a totally different beast in terms of like the functions, the things you do, the skills you need. And so it's really hard to go backwards. And so I kind of created this path out of the company basically. And once I got there, I was just kind of like, okay, this is the last step and now I'm ready to go. And like I said, the goal was to sort of upskill myself in terms of, knowing the different verticals of the organization. And so it really didn't make sense for me to go back and try to redo engineering or redo the PM stuff. I was kind of
but
as ready as I'll ever be.
You didn't want to finish the circuit and maybe go to marketing or maybe go to customer success first?
I probably could have. So at the end, it actually coincided right with COVID starting. And I had relocated to Sydney, Australia for the posting and enterprise sales. And so I kind of, not only in terms of like the vertical of the organization, I was physically just really far away from the organization. Right. And so it seemed just kind of like a natural path to end part ways at that point.
Got it. No, it makes complete sense. Now, when you were ready to leave, did you have the idea in place? Like, did you have the name? Did you have, hey, I want to build this website to help sell used cars? How far along, if at all, was the business or the business plan?
Yeah, so this is one place where I would suggest not doing what I did. I think, and I've watched one of my friends who recently also left their job and started a company do it in what I would call a smart way. They really built out the plan. They had their product idea, a co-founder in place all before they left their company. And I think that's a great way to do it because you minimize the amount of time that you're likely not going to have a salary. For me, I was just ready. I didn't have an idea. I didn't have a co-founder or anything. I knew I had to do it. And I'm one of those like one track mind kind of people. I'm either in a job doing that job or I'm like doing the startup journey 100%. And so I just sort of recognized that's about myself and just pulled the trigger.
Right. I mean, listen, I think, this is why we have this show, right? So that people can learn from other people's what you could call mistakes, but I mean, really, it looks like things are going pretty well for you, right? So, but just to give our thoughts maybe for people going through them in the future. But the other thing that I always think about too, Quinn, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts, is the fact that you didn't have anything ready, was that added pressure that then made everything else you did that much better, right? Like if you had it all planned, it probably still would have been a success, but was the fact that you had none of it planned and so your runway is a little bit more intense, maybe that added that much more motivation and energy?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to the kind of person you are. Like I said, I operate so much better under pressure, like you said. And when the clock is ticking, that's when I really get stuff going. And I know that about myself. But if you're the kind of person who like that clock is really going to stress you out, it's probably not the best route.
Right.
So it 100% depends on the kind of person you are. And also, I went a pretty significant amount of time without making any money, right? So it also
Right.
comes down to some degree, your personal finances. And my pet peeve, honestly, with some entrepreneurs and them giving their stories is how little people talk about that, because it's really hard to grasp. Like where these people like sustain themselves the whole time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a faux pas to talk about money, but I think you should and understand that if you want to take that risk, like you've got to either have some sort of savings background, like savings to back you up, or like quick access to raise capital. And if you don't
Mm-hmm.
have that, unfortunately, your probably only option is to keep your job until you can like raise money and really build out your team.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and that's part of why I started the show, was just wanting to ask people these types of questions, to get more information. So makes complete sense. So Quinn, let's go back to like the day after you quit. You quit your job. You know you had to do this thing. We don't know what the thing is per se yet. What were the first few months like? Like what did you do? Did you spend weeks doing research and planning? What did you
Yeah.
do?
Well, okay. So the fun part, if you can call it that, was that this is all in the midst of COVID coming up, right? So I
Right.
quit my job March 22nd,
Wow.
and I took like one of the last flights out of Sydney, Australia, back to the United States before they like shut down the airports. So I
Jeez.
was in this kind of like fake world. It was just really weird. But then you get back to the US and everything was shut down, which obviously terrible implications and everything happened. But for me, it was like I had to just like do the startup thing. I had nothing else to do. There was nothing going on. I couldn't hang out with friends. And so I just went straight into the grind in terms of like trying to upskill myself. The one thing I did, I knew I wanted to do software and I hadn't done that professionally. So it took about 2 months to just do nothing but learn software. It had
Hmm.
been a big like ask, something I really wanted to do for a long time. I never had kind of the motivation or the focus to do it. And I just knew it would be required, especially as a solopreneur in a tech space. I had to be a technical founder.
Right.
And I
So
had
what do you mean by when you say learn software? Do you mean like you learned a few language like technical languages?
yeah. So and I had, of course, a head start. So I had an electrical engineering background, which you learn some software there, but you don't learn it in kind of a professional build an actual app sense. So yeah, I learned Python basically. I took a boot camp in Python for a month and a half, and then did a few projects. And then I started really working on the business idea, and building out an actual platform, which kind of coincided with like me learning and also developing sort of the business aspects as well. Um,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. Especially, I really can relate to what you said at the beginning, which is, as someone who's also working on tech right now, it's like, yes, this all sucks. Like, yes, COVID has been terrible, but if you're at a period in your life where you want to like shut out the noise and focus on one thing, like building a business, it's like weirdly a good time for that, right? As bad as that sounds. So okay, so you start learning Python. I'm still very curious to know at what point, or what was the prep around the business plan around, hey, this is the first, tech company or big piece of software I want to build. How did that come to be?
Yeah. I think sorry, I sort of went in a different direction on that
No,
question
I
last
think that
time.
was still, I think that's still like interesting to hear, in the sense that not only, like you said, like sometimes we don't hear a lot about the finances part, but it's like, okay, like what did you actually do, right, for those first 3 months, 6 months, whatever. So I think the piece you just mentioned is just as important. But anyways, I'll hand it back over.
Sure. Yeah. So I think, and this is again where you could probably learn from my quote unquote mistakes. And I, I had a strategy where I wanted to learn to code and I wanted to do projects on that. So I was much less concerned about the viability of the business at that point, because in my
Hmm.
mind it was more of just like a project, right? Like I wanted to build a platform so I could get that experience. Um, I started in virtual car shows. I thought, it was an interesting time, everything going virtual. I love car shows. And I still think there's a space in it. It turns out there's just not enough money because they're put on by organizations that tend to be charities. But like 100 million people in the United States go to car shows every year. I mean, it's actually, quite a big part of, American weekend culture. And so I was building something towards that. We pivoted pretty quickly away from that, just because it didn't quite work. But we actually held a few virtual car shows with had a few thousand people at each one, a few hundred cars. It was really cool and just a great learning experience across the board in terms of building the platform, trying to get some sales, just end to end experience. And I think that benefited me greatly in terms of once we managed to pivot into a more financially feasible business model.
Right. And who's the we? You mentioned we. At that point, did you find co-founders, or who was the team?
So I'm still a solo founder. I did had contractors that I've worked with now for a pretty good amount of time, maybe 6 to 8 months, and they've been great. So I just generically say we all the time because that's stupid saying me.
And contractors have obviously become a great source of talent and resources for companies, for anything, right? I mean, the prevalence of VAs or contract developers or contract anybody. How did you go about finding yours, and any tips for those, whether solopreneur, entrepreneur, big tech company, like anybody who needs contractors, any tips?
Yeah, I mean, it's brutal. I'll say that. So I use Upwork a lot. I think their service is quite good. When it comes down to getting high quality software engineers, that's where they tend to be somewhat weak, in my opinion, in that they have some issues with kind of people pretending to be people they're not presenting themselves as they actually are. And so for sort of higher end or like medium level software talent, I've moved to more focused contract services that can connect me with kind of individual engineers who are quite talented. They're still overseas, but it tends to be much higher quality and just a much better working experience.
Very cool. So let's talk a little bit about the pivot, because pivoting seems to be like the one constant among most tech companies, right? I mean, we hear the dream stories about Facebook and stuff, but I think the reality is more, most tech companies do some form of pivot at some point. What did you guys do when you kind of realized, hey, this is kind of cool, it's kind of working, but I don't think this is, maybe going to be a venture backable or, success, big opportunity. What led to the pivot?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the reasons why I've stayed a solo founder, because it gives you this ability to make that decision on a dime, right? There's no infighting. There's no, if you're a non-technical founder and you have a technical co-founder, they may kind of be married to the tech on the first platform and they don't really want to switch or something. For me, I basically was doing sort of email outreach over and over again, trying to talk to people who might be interested. And it kept coming back to the same thing in terms of, okay, yeah, but we can't spend that much money on it. And I didn't have an exact number, but I spent a week doing it and I got a sufficient number of people saying kind of the same thing to where I said, okay, I'm done. We're moving on to the next thing. And for me, it's all about just moving forward. And I think that's why so many people, pivoting is actually like not a terrible thing, because it means just like getting started with something. Just start building anything to get things moving, get the gears going, talking to people in the industry you want to be in, and you'll slowly evolve your product, if you listen to those people. It's really not that kind of life-changing or complicated. It's just like listen to the people who are potentially going to pay you and see what they say.
Yeah, and I mean, another way of thinking about it is like one thing you tried didn't work, and pivoting is really just learning from that, right? I mean, if you didn't pivot and you kept banging your head against a brick wall despite having, observed certain conclusions, and going against them would if anything be much worse. So was that pivot directly into what you're doing now?
Yes and no. And one thing I will say on pivots as well is that the further down the line you get, the more data and backing you need to make that decision, right? We had made very little revenue. We spent maybe 3 months on the platform. So we weren't very far down that line. So making a pivot decision was pretty easy. If you've done 9 months, you built a full platform and you got a few customers, that's a much more complicated decision to make, to cancel those customers and move in a different direction. So I think you have to be aware of kind of what scale you're at, and then sort of scale that decision-making process, based on that.
Right.
Going back to your actual question. Sorry, actually, can you re-say that question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if the pivot was right into what you now do, or was there a slightly different version?
Yeah, so we went into a peer-to-peer marketplace, where we sort of facilitated individuals buying kind of high-end cars from other individuals, because there's not a really great way to do it. There's a bunch of forms you have to fill out. There's not a great way if you're not physically located near them, because you've got to exchange a large sum of money without actually getting the product. And so there's some intricacies there that haven't been fully solved. We did that and we're relatively successful again. We started making money quite quickly, but ran into scaling issues. Anybody who spends any time in marketplaces will have heard of the chicken and egg problem, right? You've got a two-sided marketplace, and it's only valuable if you have a lot of people on each side. And the difficulty is getting those people there. There just wasn't a clear way to do that. So we quickly evolved from that into this, which is, one side is private party, you or I, or anybody trying to sell their car, but the other side is dealers, and dealers' sole job is to buy cars from people so that they can resell them. And that makes getting volume there significantly easier. And so that was really just kind of the next step in this strategy, I guess I would say.
Awesome. And then how did you kind of figure out that was what was going to work? Like, did things just kind of click quicker? Did sales come in faster? Like, what was it that made you think like, hey, I think we have product market fit here, and it's time to like scale this up or build the team out or raise money or anything like that?
Yeah, so I think, so early on when in the marketplace, iteration 2 of our product, we were helping people a lot. Our first step was to go on all of these different websites and try to get quotes for the car, because we weren't going to try to help them sell their car if we thought they could just get a good offer from a local online dealer. We didn't want to waste anybody's time. We kept doing that and doing that and doing that. And we're like, okay, why is there nothing like a kayak-like site where we can just do this once? And so we started building that out as like an internal app, but then realized like most people just want that. And so we just started going further and further into that. And the feedback we got from sellers was, significantly more positive than anything we had gotten, right? Like, versus before we kind of had to explain, and people eventually were like, okay, yeah, we get that. This was, you say one sentence and they're like, yes, I get it. I want that. And so it was really just kind of this rough measure of, yeah, people want this and we should go down this route.
Yeah, and I was actually, when I kind of saw your bio at first and was, before I had visited the website, was kind of thinking, I definitely want to ask them kind of like how it works. Like, what's the unique selling prop here? And then I went on the website, on the homepage, and I was like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense, and it looks awesome. So no,
thank you. That means a lot, man. Yeah, that's it's taken a long time to get there, but it's a really cool feeling to have that. So
absolutely, and again, another reason for this show is like most people don't know, like, they see the website and it's like, oh, this great business, what a brilliant idea. And they don't realize what went on to, behind the scenes, as we just talked about, to get there, right? The months, the years, the planning, the pivots, the stuff like that. So that's super important. Quinn, you referenced raising money. Have you raised money for Topmark?
Yeah, so we started off with just I self-funded a little bit. Um, I put maybe, I don't know, $30,000. I'll try to be exact, otherwise I'm just doing what I complain about other people doing. And then I raised maybe 50 to 70 other outside money. And then more recently, now we got into an accelerator.
Oh, nice.
And they do $100,000 investments in their companies, which we're actually starting in January. So pretty excited about that.
Awesome. Congrats. So,
Yeah,
so,
thank you.
so that's, what was the plan always to kind of keep it more bootstrappy? Like, do you have any intentions of fundraising in the future? Or are you just kind of like, hey, things are going well. I think we could maybe grow this thing more naturally.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the big things on me learning to code was I could keep my costs down.
Mm-hmm.
I do use software contractors, but I've done a lot of the coding, and that would have cost me a lot of money
Mm-hmm.
outside of that. So that's been really helpful. And on top of that, I wanted to be in control in terms of the pivots and making those decisions. And the faster you raise a bunch of money, the faster those that control goes away, or
Mm-hmm.
at least you have to answer to other people, right? Which isn't always bad, but I just didn't want to deal with it early on. I would say now that we've really kind of hit our stride in terms of the seller platform, we're trying to grow our dealer platform and our dealer network. We're looking to scale now. So the accelerator takes about 6 months, but we'll be looking to raise a pretty decent sized seed round in the next 6 months, and then kind of grow from there.
Awesome. I'm curious to know then, what would you recommend to a non-technical co-founder who has what they think is a really good business idea? Should they find a technical co-founder? If they can, should they pay a technical contractor? What would you recommend to them? Should
My
they learn
first
to code?
Yeah, so my first recommendation would be if they have any interest at all, try to learn to code. There's so many no code, low code platforms these days that even if you know a little bit enough to be dangerous, you can almost be, a technical co-founder.
Right.
And I
How
think
long do you think? Let's say I've never written a line of code, but maybe like basic WordPress skills or like something like that. Like, how long would it take someone like that to get well versed enough to be able to start doing their own stuff?
well, so that's really hard to say. I mean, if they're doing it full time, would be different than part time. But
Right.
they have those 12-week coding boot camps, and I'm not suggesting that those are like a great idea. But people go in knowing pretty much nothing and come out, generally knowing how to like write some software and be
Right.
somewhat adept at it. So I would say think about that kind of timeline. But the cool thing about startups is they take forever at the beginning anyway. So
Right.
you're probably not just gonna like suddenly have all of the stuff done in a week. You're gonna be doing out like customer surveys. You're gonna be sort of planning out the product, and in that process, if you add in learning to code a little bit, I think you can find yourself pretty dangerous pretty fast. My
Right.
personal opinion, and I hate to say this, but it's really hard if you're a non-technical co-founder and you don't have a technical co-founder.
Mm-hmm.
It's not impossible. There's no code platforms. I'm not saying you can't do it. It's just hard. A lot of the investors that you're going to talk to, the first thing they're going to say is, who can build the product without you having to pay them every month, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like and that's just sort of a fact of life. You're just going to have to prove yourself more, right? If you come
Yeah.
in and you're a non-technical co-founder, but you've built a platform with contractors and you've got revenue, they'll stop asking you about your technical co-founder, So
Yeah.
it's more about proof at that point. But yeah, it's definitely easier if you have one.
Yeah, no, so I'm a non-technical co-founder myself. I couldn't agree more, and I got lucky in finding a really good one pretty early on, and it makes a world of a difference for
Where
everything you just said.
how did you find she or he or
So I actually grew up with him back home, and we always kind of stayed in touch in similar friend groups. And then maybe a story for another time, but I had a falling out with the first group of co-founders of our company. And to make a long story short, two of us non-technical co-founders went separate ways from the two technical co-founders. and everything worked out. It was a terrible month, but everything worked out, and then I ended up just looking for a contractor. And a friend of mine who I'd grown up with was basically a software developer at a company, and he also had like a side gig building websites and software, just as a contractor. So he actually built our first website for cash, and then we started graduating into like, oh hey, do you want to do more work for some equity? And he said yes. And then anyways, a year later he joined us full time as a co-founder. So
That's awesome.
yeah, I got really lucky. I would add, it's definitely good to have a technical co-founder if you're non-technical, and if you can, what I learned was it's really hard to find a good one, and it's the most important decision you're probably going to make in your business. So if you can, like, date before you marry co-founders, like, get to know them a little bit more, make sure it's a good fit before you get married, get married in quotations here for those that aren't watching on YouTube. So I totally agree with that. Quinn, I also wanted to ask, with regards to accelerators, for those who are out there, maybe they have some traction, or they're early, or maybe they're even a little bit further down the journey, but are interested in applying to or getting into accelerators. Do you have any pieces of advice, 2-3 tips on what worked for you or what you would recommend?
I think these days accelerators are, there's so many companies that get so far pre-accelerator funding that the people applying tend to be actually already pretty successful businesses, and they're really just there as like kind of explosion or growth mechanisms. Back in the day, accelerators were, oh yeah, you just have a team, you kind of go into the workspace and try to knock something out. That's, in my experience, not very true these days. So don't feel bad if you don't get in, even though you think you're far along, right? Like, it's just tough. In terms of actually applying, keep it simple. Like, every response to the question or the questions they ask should be 1 or 2 sentences. If you can't explain your business model, how you're going to make money, your product in really simple terms, it just comes off as like confusing and not very convincing. And so I think, honestly, in terms of applying, that's like the biggest tip I can give. Just make it as short and sweet as possible. And then beyond that, if you don't get in, there's tons of them. So keep applying and don't get down. Just do your thing, and eventually people will understand.
Yeah, and that goes as well to fundraising, right? If you can't answer certain questions pretty succinctly, you might have a tough time convincing people to write you a check. But yeah, there's so many now, man. It's crazy how many accelerators and incubators and stuff like that. So definitely agree there.
One thing I will say just on that, because there really are so many, and do your research on which ones are valuable. Because some of them these days are now charging you various fees out of the money they give you, which, again, isn't a deal breaker, but you want to know exactly how that's going to work and how that's going to impact your cap table. You also want to know exactly what kind of network they have, because that's mostly what they're selling these days, is kind of, okay, we're going to help you build, but also connect you with investors and other successful mentors down the line. You'll validate that, right? Talk to a few people who've gone through the accelerator and get some actual feedback from somebody saying, yes, I got value from this, I would do it again, that kind of stuff. So
absolutely. And one of the benefits of there being so many is now there's a lot of niche ones like that might be even better fits. Like, for example, we got into a legal tech accelerator in Toronto. We're a legal tech startup.
Oh, cool.
Whereas something like that, may not have existed, 10, 15, 20 years ago. I don't know, like, are there car tech incubators?
There
auto tech?
There are like venture firms that are focused on mobility and automotive. And so when we raise kind of larger scale money, we'll be looking towards those. In terms of accelerators, no. We're going to ERA New York. It's one of the sort of big New York ones.
Awesome.
But it's pretty generic. So
right. Cool. No, it's great to hear, and I'm sure you'll learn a lot, and hopefully they help you guys with growing, and then hopefully that big seed round. You'll have to keep me posted. Awesome,
Yep.
Quinn. Well, this has been great. Hearing the story, super interesting, especially for where I'm at. Like, this is really good advice and things to take away. If there's some listeners right now who are maybe they're working a 9 to 5, they know there's something more for them out there. They're not happy. They want to start their own thing. Do you have two or three pieces of advice you'd give to them?
Um, First, I would just say, like you can do it. A lot of people I talk to are sort of put themselves down or don't give them the credit they deserve, and I just that's sad to see, right? Like if you want to do something on your own, come up with a strategy, a way to fund it, a way to manage it, and just do it. Don't let just kind of, oh, I don't have a lot of savings, or I'm too old, or whatever it is, get in your way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I think also just on that sort of same note, having a strategy makes things less stressful. If you go at it kind of blind, it's going to seem stressful because you're not going to know sort of where your footing is. But if you have a current job, you can support yourself, you'll start putting away an hour each evening to work on an idea and just let it go from there.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite sayings is progress, not perfection. Just like get something on paper, just start moving, and you'll be kind of amazed at how quickly that can snowball into something really cool. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's great. And like you said earlier, there's so many more tools now, whether it be website builders, low code tools, contractor networks that just make starting something, whatever it is, that much easier. So there's never been a better time, right? So, anyways, Quinn,
totally agree.
this has been great. Great story. Love the tips and advice. If people are looking to either connect with you or maybe learn more about the company, where do you recommend that they go?
Yeah, well, for anybody even considering selling their car, go to topmark.com, mark with a Q. But yeah, just go check it out. It's free, no commitment. In terms of getting in touch with me, I love connecting with other founders, mentoring or chatting, and feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm more active there than anywhere else.
Awesome. And we'll link to those in the description. Last question, Quinn. How did you come up with the name for the website?
Yeah, good. I've gotten this a few times. It's funny. I took me way longer than I wanted to come up with a name. It seems like it should be such an easy part of the process,
Mm-hmm.
but it was not for me. So Mark, Marque, is a British version of a type of car, like a make
Huh.
or a model. And so Top Mark kind of just like the best brands. It's not directly related to anything, but it's loosely car related, and I thought it sounded good. So
Yeah, no, that's cool. And it's funny you say that because for my tech company, same thing. Struggled to find the name, and I used we're in the immigration space, and I
mhm.
found basically like the Italian word for visa is visto, and I don't know, it just sounded good to me, and the
Yeah,
domain was available, so we just picked it up.
that's
But
that's
anyways,
the key. The domain being available is a big one too. So
exactly,
that's funny.
exactly.
Well, cool. It sounds like you got a pretty cool story, and the breaking up of co-founders is a brutal experience, and it's kind of interesting to hear that you've gone through it. So yeah, I'll be interested. We'll have to talk offline sometime. I'll get the info on that and see how that went.
Absolutely. Quinn, thanks again for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Yep, same here. Have a good one.